1080 is not a fast-killing poison. When ingested, it's broken down inside the gut and effectively begins to starve the animal by disrupting the Krebs cycle. Some animals are able to regurgitate or vomit the poison out and may survive. Most others, generally herbivores, are not endowed with the reflex of vomiting, so then become victims to the varying length of illness that follows. According to the Department of Conservation website, possums take 6 to 18 hours to fall to the slow-working effects of this poison. Larger mammals can take longer. In some cases, an animal might not receive a fatal dose as the amount consumed is left to the creature's appetite or the availability of the baits on the forest floor.
The drop was Friday, and the Wednesday I came out and I actually witnessed one of last year's fawns dying, and it's the most horrific death I have ever witnessed on any poor animal. It was cruel. She started off, the first thing I noticed, she had the shakes. Her head was going like this and her eyes were bulging. And then she eventually, she was staggering around, she went down. She went into like a rigor mortis, everything went tense, and she was screaming in agony, and then she'd soften up, and then she'd thrash around, and she was screaming, and then she'd tense up again, and it carried on for about 3/4 of an hour, and eventually she died.
1080 is indiscriminate. It kills everything, not only the adults but even their young, whether by eating baits directly or through drinking their mother's contaminated milk.
This is the evil nature of this stuff. It just kills everything in its way. This poor little fawn had no chance. You know, ground control allows for a little bit of discrimination and you can have a little bit of mercy, but this stuff's just evil. The tragic thing is, of course, that all the hinds that we're finding and the ones that are dead have probably all got fawns.
Approximately 20,000 deer are killed annually by 1080 drops. The deer kill rate per 1080 drop is about 50%.
This is where Department of Conservation put bait stations filled with 1080 poison. Without my knowledge, there's no signage. No one within the neighbourhood had been informed that 1080 was laid there. They told me, "Didn't you know about it?" I thought the operators were coming through your place.
You can kill over 2,500 25 kilogram dogs with the amount of 1080 that is usually put on a hectare. 2,500 dogs.
I took my dogs for a walk, my 2 Rottweilers, for a walk on my property. I locked them up at 1 o'clock in the afternoon because I was going fishing at 3. I went fishing and arrived home at 9 o'clock. We went inside and had a meal. We heard this noise in the cage. The dog was thrashing around, frothing at its mouth. Oh, it's unbelievable what was happening. I pulled it out of the kennel. I put it over here by the light and proceeded with CPR on the dog. My best mate, had him since he was a pup. Oh, I hope I never see anything like it again. It's affected us, the whole family. I just don't want it to happen again to anyone.
Once the signs of poisoning start, they become hyperactive and run and snap and bite. And then the nervous system becomes increasingly involved. They lose control of their bowels and their bladder. They experience twitching of their muscles, often facial muscles. Then the spasms of the muscles become more severe and they develop very strong spasms of muscles in their legs and tail that make all of their limbs and tail very stiff. Dogs might die during fitting, but often there are repeated fits with periods where they recover in between. There's a 2-hour period of symptoms before they die.
I myself have been involved with 8 dogs that have been lost over the years. It is pretty horrific what you see these dogs go through, and regardless of whether you've got muzzles or whatever, there is still going to be dogs right throughout the country lost on farms. That's just the on-farm dogs without any of the other pet dogs or anything else around. It is horrific, and we're expected to work right in the middle of all this stuff.
The effects of poisoning are very similar in birds to other animals as well. When birds are poisoned, they become quiet, they ruffle up their feathers, they drool and have difficulty breathing, they become clumsy and uncoordinated, they start to have twitching of their muscles and convulsions where their limbs become very stiff and their backs curve back, and then they have fits and they die. How long it takes a bird to die from 1080 is going to depend on the individual bird. One bird will differ from another. It's going to depend on how much poison they ate as well. So it's very hard to predict exactly how long a bird would have symptoms for. But in general, it's fair to say that a poisoned bird will have symptoms of 1080 poisoning for somewhere between hours and days.
Many New Zealand birds are vulnerable to secondary poisoning. This occurs when the bird consumes insects or the carrion of an animal that was poisoned or killed by 1080. Because there is no control over how much poison an animal ingests, animals that die contain varying amounts of poison in their carcass. The next feeder down the food chain then may receive either a sublethal or lethal dose of poison. Birds and animals that do recover from sublethal poisoning may be left with long-term disability or diminished breeding capability.
So who's importing the 1080 into New Zealand?
1080 is imported into New Zealand by a company called Animal Control Products, which is owned by our government, of which the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Agriculture each represent 50% shareholdings.
1080 is not a humane poison, and despite people's claims that it is humane, we now recognise that that's not the case. It's not good enough to pretend to ourselves that it's humane and keep on doing the same old thing that we've been doing for years. There's no excuse to keep on using a poison that is not humane and that we know is not humane.